My son leaned across the lawyer's polished table and whispered, "Cut Mom out. Just get it done." He thought I couldn't hear him, but I heard every word. My name is Lauren, and for years my son and his wife saw me as a simple, aging widow, a burden to be managed and a house to be seized. What they didn't know, as they tried to have me declared incompetent, was that the poor old woman they were dismissing had secretly paid for their apartment, their luxury car, and their entire lavish lifestyle. That whisper wasn't their victory. It was my signal to begin their reckoning. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute limit? I would love to hear your story in the comments. The silence in this house has become a physical weight since Robert passed, but today, the sound of my son James's car pulling into the driveway feels heavier than any silence ever could. It's a Tuesday afternoon, and the scent of lemon polish and old books hangs in the air, a comfortable quiet that has been my only companion. I pause my dusting, my hand hovering over the mantelpiece. I glance at the photo there. Robert and me, 20 years ago, beaming on the day we paid off the mortgage. He always said, "Live simply, Lauren. True wealth isn't what you show the world." I never fully understood what he meant, not really. Not until these visits from James and his wife, Chloe, started feeling less like a reunion and more like an appraisal. The front door opens without a knock. Chloe sweeps in first, a vision in crisp linen, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. James follows, his shoulders hunched, his eyes already on his phone as if seeking refuge in its small screen. "Lauren, the house looks so tidy," Chloe says, her voice a sweet melody that never quite reaches her eyes. Her gaze darts around the living room, not taking in the memories, but cataloging the assets. She runs a manicured finger over the oak rocking chair my father made. "This is beautiful. Solid wood. Pieces like this can go for a lot these days, you know." I force a smile. "It has sentimental value." They settle on the sofa, James sinking into the cushions while Chloe perches on the edge. The football pre-game show murmurs from the television, a familiar sound of an American afternoon. They talk about their recent trip to Cancun, a lavish getaway funded by a surprise bonus James received. Chloe describes the white sand beaches while subtly running her hand over my faded floral upholstery. "We're thinking of redecorating our place soon," she says, her tone light. "Something more modern, you know? Lighter colors. This dark wood is so permanent." The criticism, wrapped in the guise of casual conversation, lands exactly as intended. I feel a familiar tightening in my chest. The visit lasts precisely 45 minutes, their standard obligatory time slot. As they get ready to leave, Chloe gives me a hug. It's brief and stiff, her hands patting my back in a way that feels more like an assessment of my frailty. James mumbles something about a busy week at work, his eyes still avoiding mine. They pause at the sliding glass door that leads to the backyard, the one Robert and I installed ourselves one summer. Chloe looks out at the large lawn, the ancient oak tree, and the flower beds I tend to every morning. "A yard this big is so much work for one person," she remarks, her voice suddenly businesslike. "Have you ever thought about what a developer would pay for this land?" The question hangs in the air, cold and predatory, long after the sound of their car has faded down the street. I stand there, rooted to the spot, the cheerful sounds from the television now feeling like a mockery. As I begin to clear their coffee cups, I see it. A flash of emerald green silk draped over the armchair where Chloe sat, her scarf. It smells faintly of an expensive, unfamiliar perfume. As I pick it up, a small crumpled piece of paper falls out. It's a receipt from a high-end jewelry store downtown. I smooth it out, my hands trembling. A diamond tennis bracelet. The total reads $5,200. The jewelry store receipt felt like a hot coal in my hand, a truth I wasn't ready to face, but the frantic phone call from James the next morning forced my hand. I was sitting in my sun-filled kitchen. the receipt for the $5,200 bracelet laid out on the table, like a piece of evidence at a trial. The phone's shrill ring made me jump. "Mom, thank God you answered." James's voice was a rush of panic. "Mom, we have a huge problem. A pipe burst in the apartment last night. There's water everywhere. It's a complete disaster." I clutched the phone, my knuckles white. The sunlight streaming through the window felt jarringly cheerful. "Is everyone okay?" "Yeah, we're fine, but the landlord is furious. He's saying we have to pay for the damages, and the deductible for the insurance is $2,000. Mom, we don't have it. We don't have anything close to it." His voice cracked with a practiced desperation. "Mom, you know we'd never ask if it wasn't a real emergency." It was the same line he'd used 3 months ago when he needed $900 to fix his car's transmission. My eyes fell on the receipt. $2,000. The bracelet cost more than double that. A weak protest formed on my lips. "James, that's a lot of money. Are you sure there isn't another way?" The silence on his end was heavy with accusation. "I thought we could count on you, Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a wounded whisper. "We have nowhere else to turn. If we don't pay this by the end of the day, he's threatening to start eviction proceedings." The threat of eviction. The final, perfect checkmate. He knew I would never let that happen. The fear of him and Chloe being homeless, a primal maternal instinct, overrode everything else. I closed my eyes, the image of the glittering bracelet burning behind my lids. "Okay, James," I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash. "I'll transfer the money." I told him I would have to take it from the savings Robert had earmarked for a new roof, hoping the detail might spark some flicker of shame in him. There was only a brief pause. "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver. I'll pay you back, I swear." I didn't answer. We both knew it was a lie. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, feeling a familiar wave of resentment and self-loathing wash over me. With mechanical movements, I went to my computer, logged into my bank account, and transferred $2,000, my life savings shrinking with a few clicks. Not 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Chloe. "You're a lifesaver, Lauren." Team. The casual acronyms, the breezy exclamation point, the complete lack of any real gratitude. It was the final stinging confirmation. I was not his mother. I was a service provider, a transaction. That afternoon, a cold resolve settled over me. I got into my old sedan and drove to their apartment complex on the other side of town. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe just a glimpse of the supposed damage, a single plumber's van, anything to make the lie feel a little less suffocating. I parked across the street. From my vantage point, I could see their apartment building clearly. There were no work trucks, no signs of water damage on the exterior walls, no frantic tenants milling about. There was nothing. But there, parked in their designated spot, was a brand new black luxury SUV. It was so new, it still had the dealer plates, and tied to the front grille was a giant, ridiculous red bow. Walking into my own home on Thanksgiving Day felt like entering enemy territory. The warm, savory smell of roasting turkey couldn't mask the scent of the trap being laid for me. My cousin Sarah and Aunt Carol were already there, chatting in the living room, but the center of gravity in the house had shifted. Chloe, dressed in an elegant cream-colored sweater, was directing everything from the kitchen, my kitchen, with the unearned authority of a general. She had replaced my worn, beloved serving platter with a sleek, modern one of her own, and was instructing James on where to place the extra chairs. "It's so wonderful to have all the family here," Chloe said when she saw me, her voice dripping with a false sincerity that made my skin crawl. I remembered her coldness a week ago, the lie about the plumbing leak that had bought them a luxury SUV, and I forced a tight-lipped smile. James looked visibly tense, his jaw tight as he arranged the dining table according to Chloe's precise instructions. He was a stranger in his own childhood home. We sat down to eat, the table groaning under the weight of the feast I had spent 2 days preparing. James carved the turkey with a practiced but joyless efficiency. Once everyone was served, Chloe raised her wine glass, tapping it gently with a fingernail. "A toast," she began, her smile sweeping across the table, but never truly landing on me. "To family, and to making smart choices for the future, to ensure we're all safe and cared for." The other family members murmured their agreement, oblivious. But I knew. That was her opening. I braced myself. She set her glass down and adopted a look of deep, theatrical concern. "You know, we've all been so worried about Lauren, all alone in this big old house." She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with predatory sympathy. It's such a burden for one person, the stairs, the yard, the constant upkeep. She launched into a prepared speech, her words flowing smoothly. "James and I have been doing some research, and we found a lovely, secure, assisted living community just a few towns over. It has a garden club, social events, and 24-hour medical staff. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to paint me as a frail, incompetent, old woman in need of management. The room fell silent. Aunt Carol and Sarah shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, unsure of how to react. All eyes turned to me. I looked at James, my son, praying for him to intervene, to defend me. He met my gaze for a fraction of a second before looking away. Chloe gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. That was all it took. "She's right, Mom," James said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It's for the best. We're just trying to take care of you." The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. He had sided with her, publicly. He was using my love, their supposed concern, as a weapon to take my home. The silence in the room was suffocating. Stung and humiliated, I felt a tremor run through me, but it was not from weakness. It was from a rage so pure and cold it steadied me. I slowly placed my napkin on the table and stood up, my hands shaking but my back straight. "This is my home," I said, my voice trembling but clear enough for everyone to hear, "and it is not for sale." Without another glance at my son or the woman who had stolen him, I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving a stunned, absolute silence in my wake. The knock on the door a week later wasn't James coming to apologize. It was a cheerful, professionally dressed stranger holding a clipboard, a woman who had no business being on my porch. For 7 days, an uneasy quiet had settled over the house since the Thanksgiving disaster. I had replayed my defiant exit 100 times, half expecting a repentant phone call that never came. Now, this. I opened the door to a woman in her late 40s with a smile so wide it looked painful. She wore a sharp blazer and her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, businesslike style. "Lauren Hughes?" she chirped, her eyes already scanning the porch railings and the condition of the front door. "My name is Brenda Mills from Keystone Realty. I'm a friend of Chloe's." She extended a hand, but I didn't take it. "I'm not selling my house." Brenda's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I know. This isn't a sales call. Not at all. James and Chloe simply asked me to stop by and do a complimentary market appraisal for you. It's just to give you an idea of the value for your records. They're so worried about you." The lie was so smooth, so polished. This wasn't help. It was an escalation. They had sent a soldier to scout the territory. "That won't be necessary, Brenda. I'm not interested," I said, my voice colder than I intended. I started to close the door. Her foot, clad in an expensive-looking leather pump, shot out to block it. Her cheerful mask slipped for a second, revealing a flicker of hardened impatience. "Lauren," she said, her voice still syrupy but with a new edge, "your son and his wife were just so concerned about you getting a fair price. They feel you don't realize what a valuable asset you're sitting on. This is an incredible neighborhood. We're talking about a significant amount of money that could ensure your comfort for years to come." The phrase fair price echoed Chloe's condescending tone from across the Thanksgiving table. They were using the language of care to commit an act of aggression. My comfort is not your concern, or theirs, I said, putting my shoulder into the door. Please remove your foot. For a moment, we were locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, she relented, pulling her foot back with a sigh of theatrical disappointment. Of course. I'll just tell them you weren't receptive. I shut the door and locked it, my heart hammering against my ribs. My hands were shaking. I hurried to the living room window, peeking through the blinds. Brenda wasn't leaving. She was walking the perimeter of my property, her pen flying across the pages on her clipboard. She stopped, took out her phone, and began snapping pictures of the windows, the roof line, the large backyard. It was a profound violation, a clinical assessment of my life's sanctuary, as if it were nothing more than a listing on a website. I felt trapped in my own home, a specimen being observed. My phone buzzed on the end table. It was a text from James. "Mom, why are you being so difficult? Brenda is a friend. We're just trying to help." The message was a punch to the gut. The complete dismissal of my feelings, the gaslighting, the infuriatingly calm tone. He wasn't just complicit. He was an active participant in this campaign to wear me down. I watched Brenda finally get back into her sleek white sedan and drive away, leaving a trail of psychic dirt on my lawn. As her car disappeared around the corner, I saw my next-door neighbor, Eleanor, marching across the grass that separated our homes. Her face was grim, her mouth set in a thin, determined line. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Lauren," she said, her voice low and urgent as she reached my porch, "I think you need to see this." She held out a single sheet of paper, a printout from a social media page, her hand trembling slightly with anger on my behalf. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she held the printout, and I knew whatever was on that page was the beginning of a truth I couldn't ignore. Wordlessly, she guided me off my porch and across the lawn to her own back door. Her kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and cinnamon, a safe haven from the storm brewing in my own life. She sat me down at her small oak table and slid the paper in front of me. My breath hitched. The printout was from Chloe's private social media account. There, in glossy color, were James and Chloe, beaming with triumphant smiles. They were standing in front of that brand new, gleaming black SUV, the one with the ridiculous red bow still tied to the grille. James had his arm wrapped around Chloe's waist, and she was holding a set of keys like a trophy. The date stamp in the corner was clear, Wednesday 1 week ago, the day after he had called me about the supposed plumbing emergency. The caption underneath the photo was a final, cruel twist of the knife. It read, "Finally got our new baby. Hard work pays off. Ni wasa blessed." Hard work pays off. The words swam before my eyes. My hard work. My $2,000 taken from the fund Robert had left for my new roof. I felt a profound, hollowing shame, not just at being deceived, but at my own willful blindness. Eleanor placed a mug of hot coffee in front of me. Her voice was gentle but laced with steel. "I thought you told me they had a plumbing emergency," she asked, pointing a steady finger at the date on the photo. The last of my denial shattered, crumbling into dust. The lie was so blatant, so insulting in its audacity. They hadn't even bothered to be clever. They had taken my money, my sacrifice, and flaunted their prize on the internet for all their friends to see, confident that I, the foolish old mother, would never find out. For years, I had made excuses for them, for their casual thoughtlessness, for their growing entitlement. But this was different. This was a calculated act of contempt. "Lauren, you look pale," Eleanor said, sitting across from me. "Listen to me. I had a nephew like this, always an emergency, always a crisis, always needing just a little help to get back on his feet. It took me 5 years and $10,000 to realize he wasn't unlucky. He was a user. Family can be the hardest to see clearly." Her story was a balm, easing the sting of my own foolishness. I wasn't just a gullible old woman. I was a mother who had been expertly manipulated. "Don't let them walk all over you, Lauren," she said, her eyes fierce. "Robert wouldn't have stood for it. He would have wanted you to fight." She was right. Robert, my practical no-nonsense husband, would have seen through this charade in an instant. The memory of his strength, his quiet dignity, sparked something inside me. The despair that had been churning in my stomach began to harden into something else, something solid, a decision. I was no longer just defending myself, I was going on the offensive. "Eleanor," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I need to find out what's really going on." Yes. That evening, after thanking Eleanor for her friendship, a true friendship I now realized, I went home with a new purpose. I pulled out the old file box where I kept decades of financial records. I needed to see the pattern, to track every dollar I had given him, to build a case for myself. As I sifted through old bank statements and canceled checks, my fingers brushed against a folder I hadn't seen in years. It was a thin, unassuming manila folder from the bottom of the box, tucked beneath a stack of tax returns from the 1990s. It must have come from Robert's old desk. On the tab, in his neat, clear handwriting, was a single word: contingency. The official-looking envelope that arrived by courier the next day wasn't a surprise, but the cold, legalistic words inside still felt like a punch to the gut. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the long shadows of the oak tree were stretching across my living room floor, making the familiar space feel ominous and strange. The courier, a young man in a crisp uniform, had handed me the stiff, cream-colored envelope with an impassive expression, unaware he was delivering a declaration of war. I slid it open with a trembling finger. The letterhead was heavy, embossed with the name of a downtown law firm I didn't recognize, Davison, Finch and Associates. The letter was addressed to me, but it wasn't for me. It was about me, discussing my life as if I were a problem to be managed. I look at the contingency folder sitting on my desk, still unopened. I'm afraid of what's inside, a fear of the unknown, a fear that it might contain more pain. But the legal documents in my hand tell me I don't have a choice anymore. The letter began with a series of patronizing pleasantries before getting to the point. It stated that my son, James, and his wife, Chloe, had retained their services out of deep and abiding concern for my welfare. It went on to strongly advise that I consider signing a durable power of attorney, granting James full control over my financial and medical decisions. The justification was a masterpiece of cruel, calculated language. It cited my advancing age and, in a thinly veiled reference to my defiance at Thanksgiving, mentioned recent episodes of confusion that have been distressing to the family. My own home, my own actions, twisted and presented as evidence of my decline. The words were designed to make me feel small, helpless, and crazy. They were trying to build a legal cage around me, and the bars were made of my supposed incompetence. As if on cue, just as I finished reading the last threateningly polite sentence, my phone rang. It was James. His voice was different. It was stripped of all warmth, a cold, rehearsed monotone that sent a chill down my spine. "Mom, you got the letter from the lawyer?" "I did," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "Good. Look, it's just a formality. It's to protect you. To make sure everything is taken care of so you don't have to worry." "Protect me from what, James?" I asked, a spark of defiance flaring through my fear. There was a pause. I could hear him take a breath, likely receiving a signal from Chloe in the background. "From making mistakes," he said finally. "Mom, if you don't sign, the lawyer says we might have to explore other options to ensure your well-being." The threat, no longer veiled, hung between us, stark and ugly. "Sign away your autonomy, or we will take it from you in court." I hung up without saying another word. The silence that followed was absolute. I felt utterly alone, cornered by my own child. The shadows in the living room seemed to grow longer, darker, reaching for me. For a moment, I let the terror wash over me. They would do it. They would drag me into a courtroom and paint me as a senile old woman, and maybe a judge would believe them. It was my word against a lawyer, against my own son. This was it. This was their checkmate. My eyes fell again on the unassuming manila folder on Robert's desk. Contingency. The single word felt like a lifeline. With trembling hands, I picked up the folder. It felt heavier than it looked, weighted with the finality of a last resort. It was time. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the first document. It was a single, thick sheet of paper, and it wasn't what I expected at all. The document wasn't a deed or a will. It was a letter in Robert's familiar, steady handwriting, and the first sentence made my breath catch in my throat. I sat at his old desk late into the night, the only light in the room coming from the small brass lamp that cast a warm, intimate glow on the papers before me. The world outside was silent. Inside, my own world was about to be remade. "My dearest Lauren," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means you have found yourself in the exact situation I feared." His words reached across the years, a direct callback to his quiet wisdom, to the warnings I had never fully grasped. I read on, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He explained everything. He wrote that his own family had been torn apart by an inheritance decades ago, and he had vowed never to let money poison our lives. He wanted James to grow up knowing the value of work, not the weight of a trust fund. So he kept his success a secret, living a simple life to give us a normal one, and to see what kind of man his son would become without the corrupting influence of wealth. With trembling hands, I reached back into the folder. The next documents were heavy, official. Stock certificates for major tech companies, names I recognized from the evening news, worth staggering amounts. Deeds to 3 commercial properties downtown, buildings I passed every week without a second thought. And then a statement for a trust fund, managed by a firm I'd never heard of. The number at the bottom of the page seemed impossible, a string of zeros that my mind struggled to process. $15 million. The reality of it was so immense, so life-altering, it felt like a dream. All these years, I had clipped coupons and worried about the electricity bill, while this silent fortune waited. The terror I had felt just hours ago began to recede, replaced by a dizzying sense of disbelief, and then a slow-burning ember of empowerment. But the final discovery was the one that truly broke me, and then rebuilt me into someone new. Tucked at the very back of the folder was a slim, professionally bound ledger. It was kept by Robert's financial advisor. Its pages detailed every gift and loan Robert had ever given James, meticulously dated and categorized. And beside it, a second ledger, detailing every dollar I had given him since Robert's death. There it was, in neat, undeniable columns. The $900 for the car transmission, the $500 for a dental emergency, and the most recent entry, $2,000 for a burst pipe. The weight of the secret, the stark, irrefutable proof of my own unwitting generosity, and the immense power I now held coalesced into a moment of pure, cold clarity. The fear that had been strangling me for weeks was gone, burned away by the righteous fire of the truth. I was not a confused old woman. I was not a burden. I was their silent, unacknowledged benefactor. An iron will settled into my bones, heavy and certain. My eyes fell to the last lines of Robert's letter. It felt as though he was speaking directly to me, giving me my final instructions. "This is your shield, Lauren. Use it to protect yourself. The power is, and always was, in your hands." And then, a final sentence that charted the course for the rest of my life. "If this day ever comes, call Mr. Evans. He knows everything. He's been waiting for your call." I reached for the phone. The voice on the other end of the line was exactly as I remembered from years ago, calm, kind, and carrying the quiet authority of a man who held all the secrets. "Mr. Evans," I said, my own voice a little shaky. "This is Lauren Hughes, Robert's wife." "Lauren," he said warmly, and I could hear the genuine respect in his tone. Robert told me this day might come. I've been managing the contingency portfolio for 20 years. Please come to my office whenever you're ready. His office was on the top floor of a glass skyscraper downtown, a world away from my quiet suburban street. The room was discreet and elegant, paneled in dark cherry wood, with a thick Persian rug muffling every sound. The air smelled of old leather and success. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawled below, a toy set of cars and buildings. For the first time, I felt like I was looking at it from a position of power. Mr. Evans, a distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and a steady gaze, gestured for me to sit in a plush leather armchair. He didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a tablet across the polished desk, its screen glowing with charts and figures. "This is you, Lauren," he said gently. He walked me through the full extent of my wealth, translating the complex world of finance into simple, staggering facts. The stocks Robert had bought in a fledgling computer company back in the 1980s, the 3 commercial properties in the heart of the city's booming business district, the diversified mutual funds. He showed me the income they generated, an annual sum that was more than I had earned in my entire life. I was not just comfortable, I was wealthy. Then he slid a thin, spiral-bound report in front of me. "And this," he said, his voice softening, "is what you need to see." It was the most damning evidence of all. He had compiled a professional report on James and Chloe's finances. On one side of the page was a list of their debts, credit card balances in the tens of thousands, a massive loan on their new SUV, personal loans from high-interest lenders. On the other side was a corresponding list of the payments I had made to them, my money, transferred on the very days they had made their most extravagant purchases or fallen deeper into debt. "You haven't been helping them, Lauren," he said, his words gentle but firm. "You've been enabling them." Seeing it all laid out in black and white, their lies, my sacrifices, was a cold, clarifying shock. I explained the situation to him, the pressure to sell my house, the humiliating Thanksgiving, the legal letter about the power of attorney. He listened without interruption, his expression never changing. When I finished, he simply nodded. "Their strategy is a common one," he said. "They are attempting to prove you are mentally unfit to manage your own affairs. We will counter it with overwhelming proof of your competence." A new strength forged in the fires of betrayal solidified within me. I was no longer a cornered, frightened widow. I was a woman with an arsenal. "Mr. Evans," I said, my voice clear and decisive, "I want you to hire the best private investigator you know. I want to know everything they've spent my money on, every dinner, every vacation, every lie." He nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "And I want you to arrange a meeting with their lawyer," I continued. "Tell them I am ready to discuss the power of attorney. I'll attend." For the first time since I had arrived, Mr. Evans smiled. It was a thin, knowing smile, the look of a man who has seen the game board and knows the final moves. "I think," he said, steepling his fingers, "it's time for the annual family financial review Robert always planned for, but never held." The thick report the private investigator delivered a week later was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a story of debt, but a detailed chronicle of calculated deception. Mr. Urs Evans had it sent by a discreet courier, and I sat alone at my kitchen table, the pages stark under the bright overhead light, and began to read. My sadness from the week before was already hardening into something colder, something sharper. The first page was a high-resolution photograph of the new luxury SUV, the red bow, a mocking splash of color. The report detailed how it was purchased with a loan co-signed using a forged electronic signature in my name. They had not only lied about the plumbing leak, they had committed fraud, using my good credit to finance their prize. It was an escalation I hadn't anticipated, a crime that went beyond family manipulation. I turned the page. The next section was a timeline, a brutal, side-by-side comparison of their lives versus their lies. On September 15th, James had called me, his voice tight with worry, asking for $600 for an unexpected tax bill. The investigator's report showed that on September 16th, Chloe had spent $750 at a luxury day spa, complete with a massage, facial, and champagne lunch. On October 3rd, they needed $1,000 for a root canal for Chloe. On October 4th, their credit card statement showed a charge for $1,200 for front-row tickets to a concert. Each entry was a fresh wound, a testament to their bottomless avarice and my boundless naivety. The report included transcripts from Chloe's private social media messages, obtained legally through a source. I read a conversation she had with a friend. "It took a while, but I've finally trained James's mom to be our personal ATM," she wrote. "You just have to sound desperate enough, and the old guilt trip works every time." My hands were steady as I turned the next page. The sadness was gone now, replaced by a cold, righteous anger that felt like steel in my spine. I was not a mother to them. I was a resource to be managed, an obstacle to be overcome. The final blow came in the last section of the report. The investigator had uncovered emails between Chloe and their lawyer, Mr. Davison. The dates were from early May, a full 6 months before the Thanksgiving ambush. They were discussing legal strategies for having me declared incompetent to manage my own affairs. Their plan wasn't a recent desperate idea. It was a long-term, premeditated conspiracy. They had been plotting to strip me of my home and my autonomy for months, all while smiling at my dinner table and accepting my money. I read the last page, a transcript of a text from Chloe to her friend, the same one she'd bragged to about the ATM. The words were so cruel, so devoid of humanity, that they seemed to burn on the page. "The old woman will be gone in a few years anyway. We're just collecting our inheritance a little early." In that moment, any lingering flicker of sympathy I might have held for my son, any shred of hope for reconciliation, was extinguished. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a greedy stranger, and the woman he had married was a predator. My phone rang, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. It was Mr. Evans. "Lauren," he said, his voice calm and professional. "The meeting is set for tomorrow afternoon. Are you ready?" I looked at the pile of damning evidence spread across my table. The lies, the fraud, the cold-blooded planning. I felt a profound, chilling calm settle over me. I've never been more ready in my life. The morning of the meeting, I didn't feel nervous. I felt a strange and profound sense of peace, the kind you feel when you know you are about to do exactly what needs to be done. The sun was just beginning to stream through the kitchen window as I sipped my coffee. There were no frantic phone calls to answer, no fabricated emergencies to finance. There was only a quiet, steady resolve. Before getting ready, I spent an hour in my garden, my hands in the cool, dark earth, tending to my roses. It was a grounding ritual. As I pruned a stray branch, I allowed myself a moment of grief, not for the man my son had become, but for the little boy with scraped knees and a trusting smile who used to follow me around this very yard. That boy was gone, lost to a greed I still couldn't fully comprehend. The morning was a final, necessary goodbye. I went inside and chose my outfit with care. It was a simple, elegant navy blue dress Robert had bought for me years ago, one I hadn't worn since his funeral. I fastened the clasp of the pearl necklace he gave me for our last anniversary. I was dressing not for them, but for him and for myself. I was reclaiming the woman I was before they had tried to erase me. Mr. Evans arrived at precisely 10 o'clock. He was impeccably dressed, a quiet champion in a tailored suit. In the car, the silence was comfortable as we drove downtown. He didn't offer last-minute advice or words of encouragement. He knew I didn't need them. He simply reviewed the plan. "I will let you lead, Lauren," he said. "I will only step in to clarify any legal or financial points." He reached into his briefcase on the seat between us and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound folder. It was heavier and more substantial than the simple manila one I had found. It contained everything: Robert's letter, the financial statements, the investigator's damning report, all professionally organized and indexed. He handed it to me. Holding it felt like holding the physical weight of the truth. We walked into the lobby of the law firm. It was a cold, cavernous space of marble and glass designed to intimidate. But I felt no fear. As we ascended in the silent elevator, I felt the weight of the moment, but also the lightness of impending liberation. The fight was almost over. Mr. Evans opened the conference room door. They were already there. James, Chloe, and their smirking lawyer, Mr. Davison, sat on one side of a long, polished mahogany table, looking smug and impatient. Then they saw me. For just a second, as I walked in, poised and calm with Mr. Evans at my side, their confidence faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed their faces. I was not the tearful, broken woman they had expected to see. Chloe recovered first, plastering a sickly sweet smile on her face. "Lauren," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we're so glad you decided to be reasonable." I didn't answer. I walked to the head of the table, took my seat, and placed the heavy leather folder on the polished surface with a quiet, definitive thud. I met her gaze, my own unblinking. "Oh, I'm here to be reasonable," I said, my voice perfectly steady, "but I think your definition of the word is about to change." The air in the conference room was thick with unspoken greed. But the heaviest thing in the room was the leather-bound folder I had just placed on the table between us. The polished mahogany surface reflected our distorted images. Chloe, smug and impatient. James, my son, a nervous shadow of a man. Their lawyer, Mr. Davison, exuding a slick overconfidence. On my side, Mr. Evans sat like a silent, powerful statue. Mr. Davison cleared his throat, beginning the proceedings with a patronizing smile aimed directly at me. "Lauren," he began, his voice smooth as oil, "we're glad you came. We've drawn up a simple agreement that will transfer management of your assets to James. This is purely to ensure your comfort and security as you move into this next phase of your life." He slid a thick stack of papers across the table. It was the power of attorney document, looking even more menacing than it had in my own home. He outlined their generous offer. I would be moved into one of the best assisted living facilities, a place called Golden Sunset Meadows. The house, my home, would be sold, and James would manage the proceeds for my benefit, investing them wisely to cover the facility's exorbitant monthly fees. Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with feigned emotion. She placed a hand over her heart. "Lauren, you have to know how difficult this is for us. It breaks my heart. But we simply must do what's best for you in your declining state." She glanced at James for support, a silent command he dutifully obeyed. James, who had been staring intently at a water stain on the table, finally looked up, though his eyes never met mine. He addressed his comments to the lawyers, a pathetic attempt to maintain a professional, detached air. "The current situation isn't sustainable," he said, his voice rehearsed. "Mom's well-being is our top priority. This agreement ensures she'll have the care she needs." He gave the stack of papers a little nudge in my direction. "Just sign here, Mom, on the line next to the yellow tab." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply let the silence stretch, letting them sit with the ugliness of what they were doing. The seconds ticked by. Chloe's smile tightened. James began to fidget with his tie. Mr. Davison, seeing my hesitation, leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Lauren, let's be realistic. A judge will always side with the concerned family. This is your best and only option. It's a generous offer." The condescension was suffocating. I remained silent. James's impatience finally boiled over. He leaned across the table toward his lawyer, so close I could see the sweat on his brow, and whispered, not quite quietly enough, the words that would sever the last thread of our relationship. "Cut Mom out, just get it done." The whisper hung in the air, a final, brutal dismissal of my entire existence. I looked from my son's desperate, greedy face to his wife's expectant one. A small, sad smile touched my lips. I placed my hand flat on the smooth leather of the secret folder and pushed it slowly, deliberately, to the center of the table. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice perfectly steady, "I believe we need to review the complete family financials. Let's start with my own." The soft thud of the folder landing in the middle of the table silenced the room more effectively than a gunshot. The air, already thick with their manufactured aggression, now crackled with a new, uncertain tension. "What is this?" Chloe asked, her voice sharp with annoyance, breaking the silence. "Your high school report cards?" I offered her a placid smile and opened the folder. The first page was a single, heavy sheet of cream-colored paper. At the top, in crisp, official lettering, it read, "Statement of Net Worth for Mrs. Lauren Hughes, prepared by Evans Financial Group." I slid it across the polished surface. Their lawyer, Mr. Davison, snatched it first. His eyes scanned the page, his smug expression faltering, then crumbling into stark disbelief. Chloe leaned over his shoulder, her own face contorting as she read the single bolded line at the bottom. James just stared, uncomprehending. "This is impossible," Chloe whispered, the words catching in her throat. She grabbed the paper from her lawyer. Her eyes were wide, darting back and forth between the document and my face. "It says $15.7 million. The number, spoken aloud, seemed to suck all the remaining air from the room. James's face went completely white. He looked as if he might be sick. $15,700,000 to be precise, Mr. Evans corrected gently from his seat, his first words in the meeting. I calmly turned the page in the folder. And that figure doesn't even include the real estate portfolio. I pushed 3 more documents across the table. These are the deeds to 3 commercial properties downtown. Robert was always so prudent with his investments. I paused, then looked directly at Chloe. "That little boutique you love on Elm Street? The one with the French handbags? I believe you're one of my tenants." Chloe flinched as if I had slapped her. The personal, intimate nature of the blow was clear. I wasn't just a distant, abstract millionaire. I was woven into the fabric of the very lifestyle she coveted. "And then," I said, my voice remaining even, "there is the matter of Robert's actual will." I produced the final will and testament, notarized and dated just 1 month before he passed away. I turned it so James could read the relevant clause. "My son, James Hughes, shall inherit a portion of this estate upon the death of his mother, contingent upon his demonstration of respectful, responsible, and honorable behavior as a son. The final determination of this behavior is left to the sole discretion of the executor, Mrs. Lauren Hughes." James stared at his father's words, the judgment from beyond the grave, and a choked sound escaped his lips. Mr. Davison, pale and scrambling to regain control, finally found his voice. This is preposterous. These documents could be forgeries. We will contest every single one of them." Mr. Evans spoke for the second time, his voice a quiet storm of authority that instantly commanded the room. "I am Arthur Evans, Mrs. Hughes's financial advisor for the past 25 years. He placed a business card on the table. "I can assure you every document is authentic, notarized, and I have copies of everything filed with my firm and the appropriate estate courts. Mr. Davison, would you like me to call the SEC right now to verify the stock portfolio?" The threat of federal involvement, of a level of scrutiny he was clearly unprepared for, made Davison physically recoil. He sank back into his chair. His professional poise utterly shattered. The shock in the room finally gave way to rage. Chloe, recovering first, shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "So you've been lying to us all this time," she shrieked, her voice shrill with hysteria. "Hiding this money, making us think you were just some poor old woman. How could you be so cruel?" I met her wild, accusing gaze, my own completely calm. "Oh, we're not done," I said, turning to a new tab in the folder. "Now let's talk about your finances." If the revelation of my wealth was a lightning strike, the contents of the next section of the folder were the flood that followed, washing away every last one of their lies. I flipped to a tab cleanly labeled Family Support Ledger. Chloe's accusation of cruelty still hung in the air, thick and rancid. "You see, Chloe," I began, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. "I wasn't hiding money from you. I was giving it to you." I slid the first bank statement across the table. It was from my personal account, dated 1 week ago. A transfer of $2,000 to James's account was highlighted in yellow. "This, for instance," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "This was for the emergency plumbing leak." Then I placed the glossy printout from her social media page next to it, the photo of the luxury SUV. Or as your Instagram calls it, the down payment on your new baby. James made a strangled noise, a sound of pure horror. Chloe stared, her mouth opening and closing silently, her carefully constructed reality shattering before her eyes. I didn't stop. I turned the page to the private investigator's report, its cold, factual text a stark contrast to their emotional theatrics. "You were right, I suppose, when you said you had a mountain of debt," I said, looking at my son. "According to this, over $150,000 in credit cards and personal loans. But the investigator also found it interesting that your largest expenditures on designer clothes and 5-star dinners always happened within 24 hours of receiving emergency funds from me." I slid another page towards Chloe. It was a transcript of her private messages. "And here, I believe, is where you refer to me as your personal ATM that you had successfully trained. Is that correct?" Chloe looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting between rage and panic. Mr. Davison, their lawyer, was utterly silent, staring at the table as if hoping it would swallow him whole. He knew he had been catastrophically outplayed. For the final piece of evidence, I didn't produce a paper. I took a small digital audio recorder from my purse and placed it on the table. "Before he died," I said, my voice softening with a real and profound sadness, "Robert worried about this. He worried about what easy money might do to James's character." I pressed play. Robert's voice, warm and familiar, filled the conference room. It was a voice memo he had recorded for Mr. Evans. "Arthur," it began, "keep the portfolio quiet. I want my son to learn the value of a dollar earned. I fear there's a weakness in him, a desire for the easy path. If anything happens to me, Lauren will know when it's right. I trust her to protect our legacy, our values, not just our money." The sound of his father's voice expressing a fear that had been so perfectly realized was what finally broke James. He put his head in his hands and sobbed, a gut-wrenching, broken sound of absolute shame and loss. It was the sound of a man confronting the full depth of his own failure. Chloe, however, had no shame left. She shot up from her chair, her face a mask of pure fury. "You did this!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You planned this! You set us up just to humiliate us!" I looked at her, at my weeping son, and felt nothing but a deep, sorrowful emptiness. I gently closed the leather folder. "No, Chloe," I said, my voice devoid of anger, only a profound sadness. "You did this to yourselves." I stood up and Mr. Evans rose with me. The performance was over. "Our business here is concluded," I said to a shell-shocked Mr. Davison. "All future communication will go through Mr. Evans." I walked toward the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. "Oh, and James," I added, not turning around. The eviction notice for your apartment, which is in a building I own, will be delivered tomorrow." In the week that followed the meeting, the silence from James and Chloe was more telling than any angry phone call could have been. It was the sound of a world collapsing. I spent the days in my quiet, peaceful home, the tension that had lived in my shoulders for 3 years finally gone. Mr. Evans called each morning with brief, professional updates that painted a grim, inevitable picture. "The eviction notice was served on Tuesday, Lauren," he told me on the phone, his voice calm and factual. "They have 30 days. Also, I've received calls from 3 of their credit card companies. With your subsidy gone, their accounts are frozen due to non-payment. The creditors are beginning to circle." Each piece of news landed not with a sense of triumph, but with a somber finality. I took no joy in their downfall, but I felt a profound sense of rightness, of a natural order being restored. They had built a house of cards on a foundation of lies, and I had simply removed my hand from holding it up. On Friday, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was James's, a desperate, messy scrawl I hadn't seen since his college exams. I opened it with a steady hand. The letter inside was 6 pages long, a rambling, incoherent mix of blame, self-pity, and last-ditch manipulation. He wrote about how I had humiliated him, how I had never understood the pressures he was under, how Chloe was a good person who had just made a few mistakes. He never once used the word sorry. The letter ended with a plea for one last loan, just $10,000, to get back on their feet. He promised this would be the last time. I read it through once, a deep, aching sadness settling in my chest for the son I had lost. Then, I walked to the small office off my kitchen and fed the letter, page by page, into the shredder. Later that afternoon, Eleanor called. "Lauren, you won't believe this," she said, her voice a mix of pity and grim satisfaction. "I was just driving past their street. There's a 'For Sale by Owner' sign on their lawn, a cheap, handwritten one." The callback to their attempt to sell my own house was a bitter piece of irony. "And that's not all," she continued, her voice dropping. "I spoke to a neighbor. Chloe left. Packed up the SUV 2 days ago and just disappeared. Left James with all the debt and the mess." The news didn't surprise me. Theirs was a partnership built on mutual gain, not love. When the gains vanished, so did the partnership. I felt a pang of something for James, alone and abandoned in the ruins of the life he had chosen, but it was a distant, detached feeling. That evening, I called Mr. Evans. I felt a new clarity, a need to look toward the future, not just the past. "Arthur," I said, "I want to make a change to my estate plan. I want you to set up a tightly controlled trust." I laid out the terms. It would be for any potential grandchildren. The funds could only be used for their education and health care, administered by a neutral third-party trustee. James would have no access, no control, no say in it whatsoever. It was not an act of punishment, but of protection. I would ensure Robert's legacy, our legacy, would pass to a generation that might learn to value it, safe from the hands that had tried to steal it. The next day, as I was watering my roses, my phone buzzed with a notification, a new voicemail. I almost deleted it, but something made me listen. It was James. His voice was a broken, hoarse whisper, almost unrecognizable. "Mom, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, just call me back." The apology I had once yearned for had finally come, but it was too late. A ruinously expensive lesson learned at the cost of a family. I stood there in the quiet of my garden, my face unreadable, and listened to the message a second time. Then I deleted it. 6 months later, standing on the balcony of my new penthouse apartment overlooking the city, I finally understood the last line of Robert's letter. "Your real home, Lauren, is the peace you build for yourself." The city lights glittered below like a carpet of scattered diamonds, a world away from the suffocating quiet of my old suburban house. The air up here was clean and crisp, and for the first time in years, so was my conscience. My phone buzzed with a call from Eleanor. "Are you still coming to pottery class on Tuesday?" she asked, her voice crackling with laughter. "Because after my last attempt at a vase, they might ask us not to come back." I laughed, a real, easy laugh. The easy friendship was a stark contrast to the strained, obligatory family calls that once dominated my life. We made plans to get lunch, and I hung up feeling a simple, uncomplicated happiness. My new home was filled with art and light. I had sold the old house, an act that felt less like a loss and more like shedding an old skin. The sale was done on my terms to a young family who I hoped would fill its walls with better memories. With a portion of the proceeds and a larger portion from Robert's portfolio, I had established a charitable foundation in his name, the Robert Hughes Foundation for Elder Justice. It provided free legal aid to seniors facing the kind of financial and emotional abuse I had endured. My pain had been transformed into a purpose. In the past 6 months, I had started living, really living. I took a trip to Italy, something Robert and I had always dreamed of. I walked through Florence, ate pasta in Rome, and stood on a cliff overlooking the Amalfi Coast, feeling the sea spray on my face. I took the pottery class with Eleanor. I joined a book club. I volunteered at the city library, reading stories to children. I did it all without the constant nagging weight of my son's demands, without the fear that my small joys were taking something away from him. Tonight, my new home was filled with the warm chatter of my true friends. Eleanor was here, as was Mr. Evans and his lovely wife, Mary. A few women from my book club had come as well. We were celebrating nothing in particular, which made it all the more special. We were simply celebrating life. As the evening wound down, Eleanor raised her glass. "A toast," she said, her eyes twinkling, "to Lauren, the quietest woman in the room, with the strongest voice of all." Everyone clinked their glasses, their smiles genuine, their friendship a warm embrace. Later, after everyone had left, I stood on the balcony again, a glass of wine in my hand, looking out at the endless city lights. There was no dramatic climax to this new chapter of my life, only a deep and abiding sense of peace. I had learned the hardest lesson, that sometimes you have to tear down a broken family to build a true home for yourself. The silence that surrounded me now was not the heavy, lonely silence of before. It was a peaceful, chosen quiet, filled with the promise of my own future. Robert was right, I thought to myself, sipping my wine as a gentle breeze stirred the night air. True wealth was never about the money. It was about the freedom to be myself. Looking out at the sunrise from my new home, I no longer think about what I lost, but about the life I have reclaimed, my freedom. I have learned that true justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your own story and using its lessons to build a better future. The morning coffee tastes different now, sweeter, in the peaceful silence of a life that is finally my own. Have you ever turned a painful experience into your greatest source of strength? Let's connect and share our stories in the comments below.